All right, let's get started with the last category, which is related to attacks on web applications. So all the three challenges are related to SQL injections on the databases. Let's look at the spec first. So again, in the folder of easy, we have information about a website. So we need to do SQL injection and get all the grades. Pay attention that we need to actually dump all the information. So we are assuming that there is a database about students with student ID, student password, and the grades of each student in the course. All right. So in this case, we need to dump all the grades in that table. So in the following, to make the attack easier, we are providing the pseudocode of the database query done using PHP. But in fact, the web application is done using Node.js. The PHP pseudocode for constructing the SQL query looks like this. So we're selecting information from a table called students, where ID is equal to $ID, which is the user input. So we assume that there are two text boxes where we can add a string here, and the password is equal to the given password. And then pay attention to the last phrase here, which we are limiting the record to just one. All right. So here, apparently we could do SQL injection, but there are many ways of doing it. The trouble we have is this limit one clause. All right. So our goal is to dump all the grades. All right, all the grades. So there could be a lot of records. We want to dump all the grades, but this limit one will cut off only one grade here. So we need to kind of somehow drop this phrase. How do we do that? We can simply do a comment key. All right. So in SQL, there are many different kinds of comment symbols, like pound key, like dash dash, but you need at least a space here. So in this case, we will use this one for this specific MySQL database sitting behind. So the idea is that we need to very carefully inject and use the single quotes so that we can match up with the single quotes here when we inject strings. And after that, we are going to inject the comment symbol. All right. So here, for the ID, we are just going to use a regular username like this without touching anything. But then we're going to play with the password. So the real string that we're going to use would look like this. And so we will do a ABC, or the password. But in fact, this might not be the real password. And we carefully do a single quote key here. And then we do an or equal or, and also match it up. And then do a semicolon, do our comment symbol here. So what happens here is that all the single quotes are matched pretty nicely. All right. And then because of this disjunction here, this equation will be evaluated first. All right. And then this always returns true, which is very nice. And then this allows me to pull all the records. And then this comment out the limit one clause. All right. So let's try our trick. So if we navigate to the web attack and go to easy, look at info.txt. So it basically tells you that where the web application is located at. All right, and the the structure or format of the username and password is structured like this. All right. So let's start up a browser. If I click right, I see actually nothing. But then we can analyze the source code a little bit. So apparently there's a main.js. Which says that once it gets the two text box values, it is shooting up the value in this format. All right. So let's directly access that servlet. So we need a port number 3000 here, according to the JS file. So currently you can see that we've got nothing here. And then we'll try to play with our injection. So recall that we do need a space bar here in the right after the comment key according to the specification so that it can be effective. So once we inject a string, you can see that we have dumped all the grades in that table. And then this is flag that we need. All right. So let's look at our next challenge. So in the next challenge, again, we have the information.txt, and our job is to get a password for user student 06. All right. So at this time, the system has applied some input sanitation to the ID input. All right. So and there's some extra Node.js code after the SQL query code. So even if we have managed to get all the records, that Node.js code will actually only return the record which contains the given student ID here. All right, so our job is to pull out the password for that user. So here the problem is that in the student ID part, we really have to do a student 06. All right, so that's pretty fixed because the filter code will actually read this. And then we can pretty much use the same strategy to comment out the limit one clause in the first question. So let's try out this idea first and see that if it's going to work. So similarly, if we analyze the HTML source code, we'll find out that the page actually shoots an AJAX request through another link called median. All right, so if I do the write record, it's going to look like this. All right, it's going to look like this, but I need the record of student 06. So what I have to do is that I can try to inject the same string. But apparently you can see that the previous attack doesn't work. So here what you could do is that you could use a number of fast testing tools like SQL Ramp and so on. And you will soon find out that this application is not vulnerable to the single quote, but actually it is vulnerable to double quotes. So it means that its input sanitation is not doing a good job at sanitizing all the special symbols. So I just to keep the same structure. All right, but replace the single quotes with double quotes. You can see that I would be able to pull out the flag for this. All right, so the next challenge is pretty similar, but this time you know that there is a student account, all right, for an ID which is greater than 10. It could be looking like this. It could be looking like this. All right, but we're sure that the user ID is less than 1,000. All right, so the attack is pretty much the same thing as the medium level attack, but we just don't know which student ID it is. So in this case, you could just brute force. Use tools like curl or use tools like burp so that you can still keep the same attack string structure, but change the student IDs with probably hundreds of exploits. You will be able to successfully pull out the flag. And so this is basically like the basic scripting work. All right, so that is pretty much the solution for the web attacks.